Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. This is To The Point English with Ben. I'm Ben. Now to start this video, I want you to look at these two sentences and tell me which one you think is correct. So we have social media has changed the way we communicate, or social media have changed the way we communicate. I bet that most native English speakers would instinctively choose the first sentence, that they would think that the first sentence is correct and that perhaps the second sentence is incorrect. Because in the first sentence we have the auxiliary verb has, which agrees with the singular noun media, right? That makes sense. But is the word media singular or plural? Well, technically media is the plural form of medium. So really the second sentence is more correct because the auxiliary verb have agrees with the plural noun media. But it's not that simple because nowadays the most common use of media is as a singular noun. Although it's not really technically correct, it's how most native speakers use that noun. So it's a curious case of technically incorrect grammar, because what we're looking at here really is subject-verb agreement. That's a whole grammar area which I look at in my online grammar course. But in this video we're going to focus on confusing nouns. They're confusing because it's sometimes not clear whether they are plural or singular. And that matters because you need to know what form the verb should take, whether it should agree with the singular noun or the plural noun. So in the case of media, if you're taking an English exam, for example, maybe a Cambridge English exam, the examiner would have to accept both options, or either option, maybe the singular form or the plural form. And of course media is a very common word these days, not just social media, but we talk about the mass media, mainstream media. It's a word that really could come up in your exam, and it comes up in general conversation a lot. And there's another noun which has the same issue. Let's look at these two sentences. The data show a clear trend, or the data shows a clear trend. Again, which sentence do you think is correct? Well, again, similar to media, data is technically the plural form of the singular noun datum. But in modern English, in sort of common colloquial day-to-day English, it's more common to see data used in its singular form. But in more traditional and formal and more academic situations or contexts, the plural form would be considered more correct. So the data show a clear trend. So I would say in an exam, the examiner would have to accept either version or either option. But technically, using data and media as singular nouns is incorrect. But it's become so common that it is actually accepted now by dictionaries, grammar books, and by your examiner. But there are other nouns which are confusing when it comes to deciding whether they're plural or singular, not because their use has changed over the years, but because they're what we call collective nouns. So collective nouns are singular nouns which are used to refer to groups of people, things, or animals, and depending how they're used, they may be followed by the singular form of the verb or the plural form of the verb. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. For example, the staff were very helpful, or the staff was very helpful. Again, both versions, both options are accepted, but they have a slightly different use. So when we use the singular form, the staff was very helpful, we're referring to the group, so the group of people that make up the staff, as one unit. So we're thinking when we're speaking, we're referring to them as one unit, not so much as the individual people. And this use is more common in American English. And generally this is true of all collective nouns. It's more common in American English to use the singular form of the verb. Whereas in British English, we tend to use more the plural form of the verb. So we would say the staff were very helpful. But also whether you're using American English or British English, it really depends on what you're referring to in your mind. If you're referring to the individual people that make up the group. So when we say the staff were, so plural, the staff were very helpful, we're thinking about all the individual people that make up the staff. And there are many other examples of collective nouns which can agree with plural verbs or singular verbs depending on the use and depending on whether you're using British English or American English. For example, team, that's a very common one. So we could say my team is playing very well, or my team are playing very well. Or for example, West Ham are the best team in London, or West Ham is the best team in London. So I would say, because I'm British, I would say West Ham are the best team in London. But an American would probably say West Ham is the best team in London, or perhaps West Ham is not the best team in London, but that's a different conversation. Another example of a collective noun which can agree with the singular verb or the plural verb is family. So when you're talking about your family or somebody's family, of course, again, it's a group of people, but sometimes you may be thinking of them as just one unit, or sometimes you may be thinking of them as the individual people that make up that group. So again, examples. My family like to eat together, or my family likes to eat together. So the first sentence there is using the plural form of the verb, like, and the second one is using the singular form of the verb. This also happens when we're referring to companies. For example, the BBC. Look at these two examples. The BBC is a public service broadcaster, or the BBC are recruiting new directors. So I've given two different examples here because it really demonstrates how we're referring to sort of different entities, right? When I say the BBC is a public service broadcaster, that's the unit, right? That's the company itself. That's the entity. I'm not referring to the people. I'm referring to what the BBC is. But when I say the BBC are recruiting new directors, I'm more emphasizing that people inside the BBC are doing something. In this case, they are recruiting new directors, the Human Resources Department or whoever is responsible for recruitment in the BBC. Another example with another company, Apple. For example, Apple is releasing a new iPhone, or Apple are releasing a new iPhone. One more example with a collective noun, a government. When we talk about a government or the government, we're referring to an entity or a group of people that make up this entity. So the examples, the government are looking into the situation, or the government is looking into the situation. In this case, perhaps the second sentence would be more likely because we're referring to the government as an entity that is doing this thing. But again, in British English, the plural option would be a little bit more common because we tend to refer more to the people within the company. Now, don't forget, as I said in my grammar course, my online grammar course, I go into a lot more detail about subject-verb agreement because it can get very confusing, not just referring to nouns, but other grammar aspects. And I look at lots of other grammatical concepts to help you with your exam or just your English in general. But before we finish this video, I did just want to touch on a few other common mistakes with nouns and whether to use the plural or singular form. The first one is the police. When we refer to the police, now I've often heard students say the police is, but we don't use the police in that way. Look at these examples. The police has arrested a suspect, or the police have arrested a suspect. So in this case, unfortunately, not like the other examples, there is only one correct answer. We would not say the police has arrested a suspect. We always use the police with the plural form of the verb. So the police have. And of course, we have the issue of countable and uncountable nouns. So of course, we'd say information, not informations, and advice, not advices. Now, I know you're screaming at the screen saying, Ben, we know this is quite basic. Yeah, but I see that mistake so often. So be very careful with uncountables. And the last one, which is very basic, but it's the most common mistake I see with my Spanish students or my Spanish speaking students in general. And it's people are, not people is. Please remember that because I've seen this mistake thousands and thousands of times. Okay, hit the like button if you found this video useful. I don't ask very often because I don't want to be annoying, but it does really help. And I'll see you very soon for another video.